Most people imagine royal courts as golden palaces filled with silk, jewels, and luxury beyond anything the world has ever seen. But hidden behind the throne rooms and banquet halls was a world so filthy, so humiliating, and so brutally degrading that even modern prisons feel merciful in comparison. Because while kings and queens lived like gods, their servants lived like shadows. And the darkest part? Many of these servants had jobs so disgusting they would break most people today. And refusing them wasn't an option, not unless you wanted punishment, exile, or death. In every ancient empire, from the Ming dynasty in China to medieval Europe, to the Ottoman harem, to Mughal India, the bodies of royalty were treated as sacred. But sacred bodies needed care, constant care, intimate care. And someone had to do the tasks that royalty refused to touch. Someone had to carry the king's waste. Someone had to wash his sores. Someone had to clean the blood from childbirth, miscarriage, illness, or execution. Someone had to test his food with their own life, and someone had to prepare his bed, even if it meant warming it with their own body first. Servants didn't choose these jobs they were assigned. Many were children taken from poor families, eunuchs forced into palace service, or people who were trapped by debt and had nowhere else to go. Once inside the palace, their lives were no longer their own. Every breath, every step, every disgusting task they performed became part of the unseen machinery that kept the royal image perfect. Because while a king appeared spotless in public, someone was scrubbing the dirt he left behind. Some jobs were so revolting that even other servants refused to speak to the people who did them. Many workers were forced to perform tasks in silence. Others witnessed things that no ordinary person was ever meant to see: secret illnesses, private deformities, and realities about royal life that could never be spoken aloud. And the worst part? Almost no one outside the palace ever knew these jobs existed. History books praise royal victories and royal beauty. They describe grand ceremonies, legendary banquets, and the elegance of queens and concubines. But they rarely mention the people kneeling just out of sight, holding chamber pots, wiping bodies, washing blood-soaked cloth, or carrying away the filth that royalty produced every single day. This is their story, a story of humiliation, a story of survival, a story of the darkest, most disgusting jobs royal servants couldn't refuse. And to understand just how shocking these duties were, we begin with a job that sounds unbelievable, but was very, very real. Servant responsible for the king's most private moments. If there is one job that perfectly shows how twisted royal servitude could become, it was this: the groom of the stool. A title that sounds harmless, almost elegant, until you understand what it truly meant. This was the servant responsible for the king's bowel movements, not figuratively, not symbolically, literally, in medieval and early modern Europe. Especially under the Tudor kings of England, the royal toilet was not a private space. Kings were considered divine, and everything their bodies produced, even their excrement, was believed to hold clues to their health, their fate, even the stability of the kingdom. So someone had to watch, someone had to inspect, and that someone was the groom of the stool. Kings like Henry VIII trusted no one, not even their closest advisors. But this servant? He saw the king in the most vulnerable position a human can be in, knew the king's diet, illness, digestion, weakness. He cleaned the chamber pot, wiped the king himself, and kept detailed records of the king's movements, because doctors used them to predict disease or poisoning. Imagine being trained not in diplomacy or education, but in how to correctly clean a royal backside. And yet, unbelievably, this role was considered prestigious, because the groom of the stool had something no one else had: private, constant, uninterrupted access to the king. He stood next to the king when even the queen was barred from entering. He heard secrets, saw documents, witnessed plans. Some grooms became incredibly wealthy because the king trusted them more than ministers or nobles. They controlled who met the king, which petitions reached him, which letters were answered. Power earned through humiliation. The job came with horrors, too. The groom had to carry the king's used linen, clean the wooden toilet box, inspect stool for signs of poisoning, sit nearby during the process, empty and wash the pot afterward, maintain the privy chamber, the bathroom area. The smell alone could make a grown man faint, and refusing to do the job, Impossible. Serving the king's body wasn't optional, it was a lifelong duty. But Europe wasn't the only place where servants were forced into degrading tasks. On the opposite side of the world, deep within the massive palaces of imperial China, there were servants, eunuchs, whose jobs were even more humiliating, more intimate, and far more dangerous. Their story is next. If Europe forced servants into humiliating tasks, imperial China perfected it into a system. A vast machine powered by eunuchs who had no choice but to obey every command, no matter how disgusting, intimate, or dangerous. Inside the Forbidden City, a eunuch's body was not his own. His life belonged entirely to the emperor, and that meant serving the imperial body in ways that most people today could never imagine. Eunuchs were responsible for the emperor's chamber pots, urine basins, used robes, bathwater, and even the bodily waste of hundreds of concubines. They cleaned menstrual cloths, washed blood from childbirth, and dealt with illness in the women's quarters. Many eunuchs spent their entire lives in rooms filled with the smell of sweat, urine, infection, or old cloth that no one else wanted to touch, and they did it all in silence. One eunuch described his job as being alive, but not living. Another wrote that the smell of the concubine's laundry never left his hands, no matter how many times he washed them. But the most humiliating duty of all was something rarely spoken of, even within the palace walls: shoshin, body watching. This was the eunuch assigned to stand near the emperor during his most private acts, including bathing, dressing, sleeping, relieving himself. The emperor's body was sacred, and no one else was allowed to be present. If the emperor fell, fainted, became ill, or showed signs of poisoning, the eunuch had to act immediately, even if it meant handling fluids or substances that would horrify modern doctors. But these were not just servants. They were witnesses to secrets no one was supposed to see. They saw the emperor's aging body, his weak moments, his sickness, his pain, his humanity. Eunuchs also managed the waste of the harem, so much that the Forbidden City employed entire teams just for washing the blood-stained cloths of concubines after childbirth, miscarriage, or menstruation. They slept near piles of dirty fabric that could pass disease from one person to another. Many eunuchs died young from infections, but deaths were ignored. A eunuch was considered replaceable. But nothing was more dangerous than the emperor's bedchamber. Assassin attempts often targeted the bedding, so eunuchs had to check it. Some were ordered to touch, lift, or lie on the bed first, a humiliating test to ensure nothing poisonous or sharp was hidden beneath the sheets. Imagine being forced to risk your life every time the emperor wanted to sleep. But their suffering didn't end there. Because in the royal world, even food was deadly, and someone had to taste it first, and many never survived that job. In every great empire, from the Roman Caesars to the Mughal emperors to the Chinese dynasties, one fear followed every ruler like a shadow: poison. Poison did not announce itself, did not require armies. It only needed one trusted servant with steady hands. And because rulers lived surrounded by enemies, rivals, jealous nobles, ambitious relatives, poison became the easiest way to kill a king. So someone had to taste every bite before he did, and that someone was a royal food taster. To outsiders, it sounded like an honor. To the servants who lived it, it was a slow emotion, death sentence. A royal taster was forced to eat small portions of every dish that arrived at the table: soups, rice, meats, desserts, wine, sauces, even the water. The servant fell ill, collapsed, or died, the king was saved. But the servant never lived long. Royal kitchens might prepare 30 or 40 dishes a day. Tasters had to eat all of them, even if they were full, even if the food was too spicy, too rich, too rotten from being left out. Many suffered from stomach disorders, weight loss, infections, and conditions that slowly destroyed their health. But the real danger wasn't overeating. It was poisoning that worked slowly. Poisons like arsenic, lead, antimony, belladonna, and mercury didn't always kill instantly. Servants could taste poisoned food for weeks before finally collapsing, buying the king time, but condemning themselves. Some tasters coughed blood, others aged rapidly. Many were buried in unmarked graves because their job was not to be remembered, and refusing to taste. Impossible. Food tasters were selected because they were loyal, or trapped, or simply replaceable. In the Ottoman Empire, Tasters stood beside the sultan every meal, eating from the same dish seconds before the ruler lifted his spoon. In ancient China, tasters were often eunuchs, forced to smile as they dipped their chopsticks first into dishes meant for the emperor. And in medieval Europe, tasters drank from the king's cup in front of entire courts, their lives publicly risked to reassure the crowd. But the cruelest part was this: tasters were never informed when a poisoner was caught.
Ow.
They simply continued risking their lives day after day, never knowing when their last meal would come. And behind the tables filled with gold plates and steaming dishes, the kitchens hid even more horrors. Because royal kitchens weren't just places of food, they were filled with blood, fire, rot, disease, and secret workers who handled the filth no one else dared to touch. These were the palace night soil servants, the people who cleaned the waste of an entire royal household, and often died doing it. If the royal kitchens were the heart of the palace, then the night soil workers lived in its stomach, surrounded by the filth that everyone else pretended did not exist. These servants were the invisible cleaners of human waste, the ones who carried chamber pots, emptied sewage pits, and scrubbed away the filth of kings, queens, concubines, nobles, guard units, cooks, children, and anyone else who lived behind palace walls. They were called many names across history. In China, Yeturin, the night soil people. In medieval Europe, gong farmers. In Japan, workers of the cesspit system, often hiding their faces in shame. In Mughal and Ottoman palaces, kitchen latrine cleaners, always stationed near the walls, never the central halls. But no matter the empire, the job was the same. They cleaned what royalty refused to acknowledge. Palaces didn't have modern plumbing. Waste collected in deep pits beneath buildings or in jars and pots that filled every day. Night soil servants had to walk these pots outside at night, balancing them carefully. One slip meant punishment, one spill meant humiliation, and one broken pot meant they would be beaten for disrespecting the palace. In China's Forbidden City, these workers operated mostly in darkness because the court didn't want their presence to disturb the purity of the imperial aura. They wore coarse clothing, simple shoes, and kept their eyes down. They had to bow before entering an area. Some eunuchs refused to be near them. They were treated as contaminated objects necessary, but unworthy of recognition. Worst of all were the pit cleaners, who climbed down ladders into deep holes filled with layers of human waste, insects, and toxic fumes. Many suffocated. Others fainted and drowned. Some were simply sealed inside when the pits collapsed. A few were found dead with their hands still gripping the ladder, their bodies half submerged, their mouths open as if gasping for one last breath. There were no funerals, no honors. Their death was just another palace chore. Royal families, meanwhile, pretended the world smelled of roses, silk, and incense. But every banquet, every feast, every night of celebration created more waste, and the night soil workers were the ones who carried it away, step by silent step. But human waste wasn't the only thing servants were forced to handle. Because deep inside the palace, royal bodies demanded constant care, and someone had to wash, clean, scrape, and bathe them, even when disease or infection made the task unbearable. These were the bath servants, and their job brought them closer to royal skin than almost anyone else, often with horrifying consequences. In palaces across the world, someone had to perform the most intimate and degrading tasks for royalty: washing their bodies. This was auntie just bathing for comfort. It was survival for the ruler and a nightmare for the servant. Bath servants had to scrub away sweat, blood, pus, and even feces, sometimes while the royal person was ill or contagious. In imperial China, eunuchs and low-ranking female attendants were responsible for cleaning concubines after childbirth, miscarriage, or menstruation. The water in which they bathed the royalty often contained chemicals, herbs, or antiseptics, strong enough to burn the skin of the servant who handled it daily. They cleaned not only the body, but clothing, bedding, and surrounding areas, ensuring no trace of human odor reached the emperor's chambers. The European courts were equally cruel. In Tudor England, some bath attendants were required to massage, wash, and rub royalty's skin, inspecting for disease, warts, or infection. If a servant failed to properly clean the king or queen, punishment could be severe, from flogging to loss of position or even execution. Many attendants became ill themselves from prolonged exposure to contaminated water or bodily fluids. Some attendants were assigned to ill kings. Imagine being ordered to bathe a ruler during smallpox, plague, or cholera outbreaks. Their lives depended on obedience, but their bodies absorbed the risk. It was a slow, almost invisible death sentence. And still, the servant could not refuse. Refusal was considered treason. The cruelty wasn't limited to disease. The bath servants were often at the mercy of the court's whims. Bath times could happen at dawn or midnight, sometimes for hours. And servants were required to remain stoic while enduring verbal abuse, scrutiny, or humiliation. In some cases, attendants were instructed to check the physical state of royalty in ways that violated their dignity, inspecting intimate areas or wounds. Wiping excrement, or massaging with oils until skin was raw, the psychological toll was immense. These servants lived constantly in proximity to death, disease, and humiliation, yet were expected to maintain composure, silence, and efficiency. Many went mad, suffered breakdowns, or developed habits of withdrawal to survive, yet they were invisible, unrecorded in history except as fleeting mentions in court documents. Even the smallest mistake could be fatal. A slip, a misjudged temperature, or a delayed bath could anger the ruler, resulting in punishment, dismissal, or worse. And still, palace life demanded their service. Day after day, decade after decade, until their bodies could no longer bear the weight of the task. The bath servant story is a reminder. In the glittering world of royal courts, there was always a shadow life, a life of servitude so degrading and dangerous that it required every ounce of courage and endurance just to survive. But even the bath servants were not the lowest tier. Beneath them were those tasked with cleaning the aftermath of death itself, corpses of royalty, concubines, and children alike. In every royal court, death was inevitable, yet no one wanted to touch it. And so, a special class of servants existed, those tasked with handling corpses. They were the invisible hands that ensured life inside the palace continued smoothly while the dead were quietly removed. These servants worked in silence, often arriving before sunrise or after sunset, carrying bodies of concubines, palace children, or officials who had succumbed to illness, poisoning, or execution. They cleaned blood, vomit, and bodily fluids, scrubbed the floors, and dressed the deceased for burial, all while avoiding the eyes of the living. In the Forbidden City, eunuchs were sometimes assigned to corpse care. One record mentions a eunuch discovering a concubine dead from miscarriage. He had to remove her body, clean her chamber, and ensure that all traces of her presence, blood, discarded garments, even her personal belongings were sanitized or destroyed. There were no honors, no mourning rituals, and no recognition for the servant. Death was simply another chore. In Europe, palace undertakers were often overlooked in history books, yet their tasks were equally gruesome. They prepared the deceased for ceremonies, sometimes embalming bodies in oils and spices, while working in tight, suffocating spaces. During outbreaks like the plague, these servants became carriers of disease, risking their lives daily. Many succumbed quietly, their deaths never recorded. Psychological toll of handling death was immense. Watching the bodies of people who had once been alive, some young, some old, some beloved, created a constant reminder of mortality. Servants were forced to suppress grief, horror, and disgust, performing their duties as if they were mundane chores. For years, they moved among the living and the dead, their minds slowly detaching from humanity. Mistakes could be fatal. Improperly prepared corpses offended the royal family and could bring punishment or reassignment to more dangerous tasks. Sometimes servants were instructed to secretly remove bodies that had died under suspicious circumstances, ensuring the court's image remained untarnished. Their discretion became a prison in itself. They could never share their knowledge. Death in the palace was not a tragedy. It was a task, mechanical, uncelebrated, and horrifying. And yet the corpses were only one part of the palace's darkest duties. Even the living, the emperor's animals, his sick or his exotic pets, created new disgusting tasks. Someone had to clean, feed, and manage them, no matter the danger. The layers of royal servitude reveal one painful truth. In every glittering palace, there were hidden worlds where the human body and dignity were constantly exploited. Life itself became a task. Next, we explore one of the most overlooked and stomach-turning duties of all, caring for the emperor's animals and exotic pets, where servants risked disease, injury, and death for royalty's entertainment. By the time dawn touched the stone floors of those ancient palaces, a royal servant had already lived a full day of silent horrors. Their work was the kind that never made it into the official records. The little that survived letters, complaints, and scattered mentions shows something disturbing. These servants were trapped in a system where the king's comfort mattered more than their humanity. And the worst part? Many of these jobs left marks that could never be erased. Some servants spent their entire lives cleaning chamber pots so foul that the smell clung to their skin no matter how much they washed. Some were forced to inspect royal waste to track illnesses. Others spent nights scrubbing menstrual cloths, mixing ointments for infections, or bandaging wounds caused by violent kingly appetites. Their hands told the story: cracked skin, raw knuckles, permanent stains. Even after they left service, if they lived long enough to leave, people could still identify them. Their smell, their posture, their ruined hands, their hollow eyes. These jobs didn't just break the body, they broke identity. But the palace didn't care. It only cared that everything looked clean, smelled clean, and ran smoothly. A perfect royal illusion built on the suffering of invisible workers, and maybe that's the darkest truth of all. Behind every glittering crown, behind every ceremonial robe, behind every king's comfortable life, there were people forced to do disgusting, humiliating, dangerous tasks no one else dared speak of. Their names didn't survive. Their stories barely survived. But their labor built the world that royalty enjoyed. Today, when we admire the treasures of old kingdoms, we forget that none of it was truly clean. Because in every palace, somewhere behind the walls, someone was suffering. Someone was doing a job they couldn't refuse. And now that you've seen what really happened behind the throne, could you survive even a single day doing what they were forced to do?